Woven cloth is the core of all our clothing and interiors and whatever. And this is the plain weave. The plain weave is the basic cloth, but it doesn't have to mean that the fabric is basic. I've chosen this one because you can easily see the warp and the weft. So woven material is made when you structure yarn in a vertical. That's called the warp. And then you weave through it with a horizontal yarn. Now, I'm doing this very well, am I? You go under and over, over, under, over, under. And this yarn that crosses it is called the weft. So weft left, really. When it gets to the edge of the fabric, you've got to be able to make sure it can turn around, the weft yarn can turn around or carry on to the next piece of cloth. And this is called the selvedge. It's where the yarns are usually slightly tighter packed on the warp, and it's where the stenter machine, to finish everything off, grips the fabric when it's going through the finishing process. So you can usually see dots here where the little needles have grabbed the fabric to pull it out to width and make sure that it stays straight in finishing. So here is called the selvedge. Self-edge maybe? I don't know. Selvedge. In this cloth here you can see that the yarns are equal size. They've got the warp and the weft of equal size, and they're crossing one another equally so that you get that one-on-one look. But it's not that you see that all the time. Here's another cloth. This one is where the different colours have been used. It's a lightweight shirting material, or it could be a very light dress. It's 100% cotton, so it creases quite a lot. You can easily see the selvedge here because that's where the weft, which is a sort of yellowy green, comes across and turns around again, and you've got that hairy edge where the knife has cut the thread. Yellow on the back, blue on the front. Plain weave is very good for printing too. This is a viscose cloth. It drapes very well because viscose does. It's cheap. And it takes colour very well. All plain weaves that are made in fibres that take colour well, like cotton or viscose, work because the texture doesn't interfere with the print. This is another plain weave. This is made in 100% wool. It's a coating material called mouflon. And what's happened is that it's been woven plain weave, and then because it's 100% wool, it's been processed and shrunk, so the fibres have felted, then been brushed and then rolled with hot rollers, which makes it a more shiny cloth, and that's for a coat. What is universal about all of these fabrics in the plain weave construction is that you have very little give on the warp because you're tightening on the yarns. You have very little give on the weft, but you have give on what we call the bias, which is the diagonal. And that's why it's very important when you're cutting clothes, you're making clothes, that you cut the cloth in the right direction. 1930s clothes where there was lots of drape were often cut on the bias. So that's plain weave for you, and it can be as fine as this, which is a glove made in a synthetic cloth. I've got to mend it, but it's super fine, and that's made of microfibers. Plain weave is the basic woven cloth. We looked at the plain weave, and now we're going to look at a popular variant of a weave, which is called a twill. A twill is when you're not going over one and under one, you're starting to create a pattern. So I've attempted to illustrate it here. Our warp is vertical and our weft is horizontal. But instead of going over one, under one, over one, under one, we're starting to go in this illustration over two, under two, over two, under two. There we are. And we're going, because of the way that the loom is set up, we're going in one direction. And this cloth illustrates it. Here it is. It creates a diagonal. Now, these cloths could be woven very finely or very thickly. When it's thick like this, this has got wool yarn in it, the twill tends to be more flexible. There's the bias. for the diagonal. It is more flexible. But twill does pack in the threads a little bit more tightly in the warp, and because otherwise the fabric would be hopeless, it would fall apart. Not all twills are the same. Then it's all about designing. So here we've got a Harris tweed, and all tartans are on twills too. This is when you use a twill and you play games really. It's still a diagonal twill, but you're playing games with the warp and the weft colours so that you're creating a dog's tooth check. This is a very thick one and used for handbags, but this is a finer one used for coating. Then if you make the yarns even finer still, and you set up the loom so that you've got diagonals going in both directions. That's possible by setting up the way the loom is threaded with the yarns through what are called the heddles. That's what lifts the yarns up and down. This has got a warp of a red and a weft of cream, and so it gives you what's called a herringbone. Twills are used throughout weaving and woven cloth, but the most popular is denim. Denim is a twill weave, so when the yarns are very fine and the warp is packed together quite closely, then the strong cotton yarn can be woven across it. And because the warp is packed more tightly and the weft can be packed more tightly because it's not going over and under, it's leaping some yarns, then it makes a very, very strong cloth. So twill is essentially about creating a diagonal that influences pattern and strength.